Hello, this is Ross Bliley from the podcast Pigskin Tales. This podcast is sponsored by Sterling Soap Company. With products sold throughout 41 locations around the globe, Sterling Soap Company has a unique assortment of products to choose from for your loved one for the holidays. Handmade artisan soaps created by Roderick and Amanda Lovin since 2012, these products are affordable and provide great value. Act now and save on your shipping costs. If you purchase $75 or more, your shipping cost is free in the United States. Shop now online at sterlingsoap.com.
Are you a hockey fan? Then you'll love Eric Zweig's new book, Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2. It's a treasure trove of untold tales, bizarre incidents, and captivating trivia that will leave even the most devoted puckhead astounded. The intense rivalries, epic showdowns, and historic clashes that shaped the NHL's early years, it's all in there. Zweig uncovers the true stories that helped shape the sport, ensuring that you will never look at hockey the same way again. Check out Hockey Hall of Fame True Stories 2 on Amazon or wherever fine books are sold.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, weightlifting and sports fans. Welcome to another edition of No Nonsense Old School Weightlifting History. You can also listen to this podcast on Yesterday's Sports on the Sports History Network. My son Everett is here with me again, and we will start today's conversation by discussing the rule changes regarding weight increments during competitions.
But, that being said, though, there's incentive for someone like that to only break the record by 1 kilo to get that payment and then do it again next time, 1 kilo.
I think it was the same with Vasily Alexiev. And at that time, you could break a world record by a half a kilo. And it was the same with him.
Well, this is getting into another topic we'll have to talk about next.
Yeah, that leads right into the weight increments, right?
Yeah.
So that...
Yeah, because I mentioned now that minimum increment is 1 kilo. And that's regardless if you're going for a world record or not. Or anything else. But it was a lot more complicated back then. Or I shouldn't say more complicated, more nuanced, I suppose.
I think the
worked.
from the best I could gather with my research, it looks like they changed this in 20 years ago. In 2005 is when they went to the 1 kilo increments.
Mm-hmm.
Now, of course, I told you back when I was lifting, it was a lot harder to plan out your attempts because from your first attempt to your second attempt, you couldn't take less than a 5 kilo jump. Looking back on it now, that seems insane, but that's how it was up.
Yeah. Especially if you're a lighter
for the
athlete, and if you're a light athlete in the snatch in particular, that's a huge jump.
Or it's just someone like someone that's not a top-notch, like myself. I never went to the nationals.
Right.
I never qualified for the nationals or anything like that. So it wasn't that big of a deal for me.
Right.
In the clean and jerk, it was no big deal.
But that's big in the snatch. If your best snatch is 100 kilos, that's 5%.
And I wasn't as good in the snatch. I was more of a clean and jerk lifter. I wasn't as good in the snatch. So for me, a 5 kilo increase in the snatch was a pretty big increase. And then from second attempt to third attempt, you couldn't take less than a 2.5 kilo increase.
Now, this is what I find. I find the 5 kilo from first to second very interesting because most people, if they know anything about this topic, they know about the 2.5. But I think the 5 from first to second, that's very seldom talked about. Most people were under the impression that it was just the minimum increment was 2.5.
No.
But I think most people don't know that that was only after your second attempt even.
Your first attempt to your second attempt had to be no less than 5 kilos. And that changed in 2005. I think they went from like one extreme to another. Now, as far as I know, and I could be wrong, but I think they, in 2005, they decided you could just take a 1 kilo increase from your first attempt to your second attempt. So they went from a minimum of 5 kilo to only 1 kilo. They went from one extreme to another.
Yeah, I think it's ultimately a good change because when you present it like that, it's extreme to say you could take only one from first to second, but obviously nobody's actually doing that. It just gives you, really the purpose of it is just to give you a lot more freedom in the selection, right? Because now you're not locked into a 2.5. You could do, if you're really unsure, you could do only 2. You can make a much more specific selection of, let's say you don't quite want to do 5, but you could do 4. I think it just gives you a lot more freedom in your selection. But it is interesting with the world that doesn't change for, probably because the 4th attempt is gone, that doesn't change at all for world records. The minimum increment is 1 kilo, where that is something where you actually had, that's the one area where you had more freedom back then, is if the minimum increment was 2.5 unless it was a 4th attempt for a world record, in which case it was by
you could do
0.
half a kilo.
So that gave you a lot of freedom for what you wanted to attempt. You could take a very specific number.
The one thing I don't like about the 1 kilo increment is that guys will use it now they'll use it to their advantage for the clock. They'll delay the clock. So in other words, let's say a guy takes 200 kilos on his first attempt. All right, he makes it. Now they go to the scorer's table and tell him, okay, second attempt, I want 201, knowing full well that he's not taking 201, but he's just using that.
Because you get like 2 or 3 changes.
Yeah, that part I don't like.
So you can buy time with that and then change it to, let's say you actually want 205. You can say 201 to delay, and then you can say 202, and then you go 205. And that there's a lot of strategy in the back room. I'm not
crazy about that, using it to play with the clock like that. I really...
There's a lot of games in the back room now, which is all kind of the coach as part of a competition. I don't even know exactly how it works, to be honest, but there's a whole nother element to that where if you do a change in a certain way, you can actually cut the clock of another lifter's attempt.
Yeah, I don't like that.
It's like it's not really designed for that to be done on purpose, but there's basically a loophole where you can take another lifter's 2-minute clock, and by doing some jockeying in the back room, you can cut that to a 1-minute clock. So there's a lot of complicated stuff.
Doesn't seem like good sportsmanship.
It's very hard to understand.
Doesn't seem like good sportsmanship.
Yeah, but it's one of those things where at a high level everyone's doing it because it's available, and it's not, it's you kind of have to do it. It's just the strategic thing to do.
Yeah, I think from first attempt to second attempt, they should make it at least 2 kilos. There's just too many guys playing with the clock, and it delays the competition, too.
Yeah, I think you could fix most of that just by changing the rules surrounding attempt selections and attempt changes. I don't think you would have to change the increments. I think you just need to change the rules surrounding the attempts themselves.
And I don't know if I thought that at some point they changed the clock, like the amount of time you have between lifts.
Yeah, they did.
I don't really.
What was it during your time of competing?
Probably didn't. When I was lifting, I never really paid any attention to that because I was always so anxious to get out. I was always anxious. So as soon as the bar was loaded, I was out there ready to take my lift. So I never really paid that much attention to it. But I'm pretty sure it was 2 minutes in between lifts, unless you were following yourself, and then they gave you 3 minutes. Now, is that still the same, or is...
Yeah, no, it has changed. I couldn't remember exactly what it was in your time, but it definitely has changed since then. I think, and I haven't personally competed in some years, so I might be a little off on this, but if I'm remembering correctly, it's now the same as that, but reduce 1 minute from both of those numbers. So it's a minute between attempts, but if you're following yourself, it's 2 minutes. And that's where that trickery in the back room comes in, is you can take that 2 minute clock and cut it. And I don't remember, I don't really know exactly how that works.
So they should have left the clock alone. They should have left it the way it was.
Yeah, I can understand why they wanted to reduce the time between attempts from 2 to 1. But I think 2 for following yourself is a bit too strict, especially when there's a way to take time away from somebody.
They thought they were reducing it, but they're really not reducing it, because now guys figured out ways to delay the clock.
Yeah, prolong it. Yeah. I think it would be better if there were some rules to prevent a lot of that trickery, and then just increase the time between following yourself to at least 2 minutes 30 seconds. Maybe bring it back to 3 minutes, because that 2 minutes is very tough. If you're a super heavyweight doing clean and jerk, 2 minutes is not quite as bad in this. Time.
Not quite as bad in the snatch, but you're right. In the clean and jerk, you're looking at...
Yeah. For anybody, really, but especially for
there's
like
a reason
super
they
heavy.
call it the clean and jerk. It's like 2 lifts. First you clean, you got to clean.
Yeah, it's extremely fatiguing. And it's a much heavier weight than in the snatch. So clean and jerk takes a lot out of it. It will leave you winded for a while. And most people, they train around that. They do a lot of their training specifically for that, with very short intervals, to be conditioned for that situation. But I think if you just allowed people a bit more time, I think that would be for the best, because then there could be rules to prevent some of the changing attempts so much, and people wouldn't really need that if they had more time, I think, following themselves. And I do think the 1 minute between attempts of different people is still fine, most likely. Like, I think you do save a lot of time on the competition with that.
Well, I think we've gone over. We've almost reached the hour point. And
yeah.
Is there anything else that you want?
There was one. I think there was one. Oh, yeah, there was one other small topic related to all this. Yeah. Oh, also the record makers competition. This is kind of related to that fourth attempt topic in the world
Right.
record culture. The difference in
What
that.
did you want to talk about first? The tiebreaker rule change, or well, yeah, let's talk about that.
Well, let's talk. Well, have you
Well,
talked about
I
the
don't.
record makers? Because that's related to
That was
what
such
we've
a
been
great
talking
event.
about.
As far as I know, there were three. There were only three of them. It was called the Record Breakers competition. Record Breakers. I believe the first one was in Las Vegas, 1979. Could have been 78. I think it was 79. Record Breakers in Las Vegas, and it was a way to get the countries together, and it was really just about breaking records. And it was great for the fans, fans that fans that couldn't make it to the World Championships or the Olympics. It was an easier competition to go to. Las Vegas was the first one. That one, I remember Vasily Alexiev was in that, I believe, but I think he was injured. And Sultan Rachmanov was the big.
Oh yeah,
That the one.
Wasn't there a story of Alexia doing like
snatch,
a one-handed barbell
right.
snatch, like not a dumbbell snatch.
100
kilo, I think.
Yes.
One-handed
barbell
injured. Snatch.
Yeah, he was injured.
While injured. Yeah.
And I heard a lot of stories that now Las Vegas, of course, there's a ton of gambling. So he goes into the casino, and he sees all these people pulling out $100 bills. So he goes to the.
He was like, "Yeah, how much money can I get on this one-handed snatch?"
IWF big shots, and he says, "I'm injured, but I could lift if you're willing to part with some money." But they wouldn't give him the money, so he said, "All right, just I'll do a one-handed snatch for the fans." So he snatched 100 kilos with one hand, and I don't remember really who was in. I wasn't really following Olympic lifting at that time, but then 1980, of course, was supposed to be the Olympics, so they didn't have the record breakers. 1981, I guess there was still probably some ill feelings about the boycott. Then 1982, that's the one that me and cousin Bill went to in Atlantic City. And 1983, we.
And how lucky were you that it was in the state you were living in?
Two in a row.
Pretty amazing.
The following year, the one in Atlantic City, we took a bus. I guess it was about maybe a 2-hour trip with the bus. And then the following year was in Allentown, Pennsylvania. That I think that was actually a little closer than Atlantic City. That took about an hour and a half. That one we did with we drove. I think we drove, if I remember correctly, we drove in with Bruce Clemens, me and cousin Bill and Bruce Clemens. And it was amazing. That's why I missed the fourth attempt. I mean, the fans were just going crazy. All the not all, but a lot of the top lifters from the Soviet Union and Bulgaria were there. And even the U.S. lifters were breaking U.S. records. They had a guy at that time, Jeff Michaels. He was destroying the snatch record in his weight class. And Pizarenko broke clean and jerk. There was records falling left and right, and the fans just went crazy for it. And then 1984, of course, they didn't have it because that was an Olympic year. And then that was the end of it. They never did. I don't know why. I don't know
never did it
why.
again, yeah.
Maybe it had something to do with. Maybe it had something to do with after Sulamunglu defected, the
Maybe.
KGB was always they were always
they
pretty
probably
paranoid about lifters defecting.
Yeah, I would think after that they were like, yeah, we can't take these risks anymore.
So it was only as far as I know there was only 3 of them, and
yeah. But now today, I mean, it would be amazing to see something like that come back again.
It would be.
I mean, you can't tell me that like people wouldn't go wild to see something like that. Because you would have people coming in probably doing more than they're doing in normal competitions because they're not cutting down weight or anything like that. Like it would be amazing to see Carlos Nassar come in weighing like 96 kilos or something like that, like more than he normally weighs, and just clean and jerking over 230 or something like that.
Great.
For an event like that. People will go wild.
And that reminds me.
It'd be amazing. And at those record breakers as well, were those also the ones where they did like the Sinclair battles?
That was the World Cup. They called that the World Cup. They would do the Sinclair.
So for context, for people that may not be familiar with that, means that's referring to the Sinclair formula, which is a ranking system to determine basically pound for pound who is the best weightlifter. So it's a way of comparing the skill level of weightlifters across weight classes. So it's a coefficient that you use to input the body weight of the weightlifter and the total that they've put up. And by using that coefficient, you can compare the performance of 2 different weightlifters in different weight classes.
Now you mentioned some guys could come in overweight, and that reminded me of the one in Atlantic City. That's what happened with Yuri Vardanian. He normally lifted in the 82.5 kilo weight class. In this competition, he didn't have to worry about his weight because it was just about going for insane weights. So
that's why I think you would see bigger weights, because they're coming in basically at the weight that they normally train at rather than compete at, and they're actually stronger. So I think he was state.
Well, I know he was slightly overweight. I think he weighed in at 85 kilos instead of 82.5. And he attempted I forget what this is in kilos, 227.5. It was 501 pounds. He attempted a fourth attempt. He attempted 501 at only 85 kilo body weight, and he racked it. He actually racked it. He couldn't stand up with it, but he was sitting there very comfortably. He racked it with his elbows up high. He was, as you know, he was a tremendous pull. He was known for his tremendous pull. He was sitting there very comfortably, and Bruce Clemens took pictures of it, of course. It's in the magazines. 501, he's sitting there, but he wasn't able to stand up with it. But I was just astonished.
Famously efficient lifter. Like the weights that he was able to clean compared to his best front squat was like unbelievably close together.
Yeah, it would be great if they'd bring that back, but
it would be very cool to see something like that. There are some similar sorts of events, not similar in the sense of the same kind of competition, but similar in the sense of
Right.
being a sort of an exhibition. There are a few things like that. Like you have the Bundesliga that they do in Germany. That's sort of an exhibition event. You have, I think they've done a couple times IWF like
Wow.
street lifting event, not to be confused with like the calisthenics type of street lifting, but street lifting in the sense of it's like an outdoor thing in a tent, and it's for everyone to just come and see. And they'll do events like they'll do like team events, for instance. So it'll be like, for instance, they'll have teams where it's like one male from a certain weight class and one female from a certain weight class, and they're on a team, and they combine the total of their totals.
That's neat.
Their two totals compared to another team's two totals.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah. So it would be really cool to just see more exhibition things like that. Like there needs to be more things like this to garner more interest in
I agree.
the sport.
So our final topic, we were going to talk about the tiebreaker rule.
Yeah. Yeah, and this is we're leaving on a hot one here because I have strong opinions about this one.
So, two lifters in the same weight class, and obviously this is the reason they have a weigh-in before the competition. Two lifters in the same weight class, if they both wind up with the same total, they have tied. So there has to be a tiebreaker. And as far back as I think this was always the rule as far as I know, up until, I wrote it down here, I think in 2009 is when they changed the rule. It used to be the way they changed, the way they broke the tie was whoever weighed in at a lighter body weight was declared the winner. It was simple.
Which is a very simple and understandable way of doing it. And makes a lot of sense from a physical standpoint.
One world champion.
And they even in a lot of those competitions, when they showed the lifters, they would come up, and when they showed the card for the lifter with their name and the weight they're taking and everything, it would show what their exact body weight they weighed in at. Right? So if let's say it was an 82.5 kilo lifter, it would show their body weight as 81.79. You know, it showed like very, very accurately what they weighed in.
Sometimes it was just a matter of a very, very tiny amount different. Like you said, maybe one guy weighed in 81.79, the other guy weighed in at 81.76. It could be that close. And that actually did happen with our friend George Pajora at the 1984 Nationals. I think it was 84. He competed against another guy I got to know pretty well over the computer, Mark Lavelle from Chicago, Illinois. They tied. They had the same total in the 82.5 weight class. And Mark Lavelle was slightly lighter body weight. So George had to settle for the silver medal. But in 2009, they changed it. They changed the rule. And I don't know why, just like every other.
I think this is... So we've talked about a few changes. Up until this point, in the past two episodes, we've kind of talked with a little bit of disdain for some of the changes that have been made. We've generally agreed that most of the changes have been for the worse on a lot of the things we've talked about. But today we've talked about a number of things where we've at least a couple of things where we at least feel it's a pretty neutral change or maybe a slightly positive change. But this is something that is just, to me, one of the silliest changes there have been. I do not understand the reasoning behind this change, and I just think it's one of the worst calls they've made with changes. It's not hugely consequential, I don't think, but it just irks me because the system you explained makes
simple,
so much sense.
cut
and it's
dry.
Easily understandable, and it's very objective. If you lifted the same weight and you weighed less by even a little, that is objectively a better lift. That is a more impressive lift. By a tiny bit, just barely, but objectively is physically harder for you to lift that weight than someone that weighs a little bit more. But now what they changed it to is, I think, it's not, in my opinion, it is not easily understandable to someone who doesn't follow the sport. And I think that's one of the reasons they did it, which is, to me, ironic. I think it does the opposite. They were trying to change a few things to make it a little bit more viewer friendly, but I think this one is the complete opposite. I think the other way was very understandable, and this new way is just weird. The new way is, it's simply whoever lifted the weight first. So to simplify this and not even talk about the total, let's just say we're talking about who's winning the gold medal in the snatch. So if we have two athletes who have both snatched 150 kilos, and let's say those were the last two lifts of the snatch session, where these two attempts at 150, both athletes are successful on their third attempt with this 150. It is whoever came out and did that lift first that is considered to have won the snatch, regardless of the body weight, which is no longer a factor in that. And I don't really understand the logic behind this. Again, I think it was made to be more easily understandable. Like, it's easy to explain that, to say, oh, it's because he did it first, but that's just because it's easy to explain, it doesn't make any sense, though. It's like, but why does that matter? Why is that a measure of which is the better lift? Yeah. Right. That's not likely. I mean, that's an extreme example, but, even if it is by that little bit, it should matter. No. Yeah, it could happen there. I mean, even a difference of half a kilo it matters. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's just, I mean, I don't understand that. Why are we measuring who wins based on decisions that have been made in the back room, basically? Because that's pretty much what determines who comes out first, is some of the coach's job in the back. It's just, that's like a silly thing to base it on. I just don't understand that. And then, it gets even more complicated with the total. That's why I left that out at first, because then if we're talking about the total, then it's specifically whoever made their clean and jerk to make their total first, which is then it's getting really complicated there, because they didn't necessarily make the same clean and jerk. Right? So if somebody comes out and they do the lighter of the two clean and jerks, but it gives them the bigger total, well, it's like, well, obviously, if it was lighter clean and jerk, he did that first, naturally. So it's like, now you're getting punished for having a better clean and jerk, basically. I don't right? Because the other guy technically made his total first. So that's just a silly way of measure. It doesn't make any sense to me. And again, it's not hugely consequential because the case of that happening is so rare, of a tie in the total. But I just think the old system for that was absolutely perfect, and I don't understand why they thought that needed to be touched with a 10-foot pole.
But this seems to be the case in every sport where they change the rule. Yeah. They're constantly changing rules that have been in place for years and years and years, and it was never an issue. There was never a problem. It's like you're changing rules just for the sake of changing rules. If the rule is if there's not a problem with the rule, why are you changing it? Leave it alone. And it's happening in every sport. They just constantly changing the rules for no apparent reason. I mean, if there's
and we talked about several rules tonight that there are problems with, that are good cases for changing rule. And ironically enough, you don't see those changing, do you?
No.
The ones that there is good reason to change.
The ones that should be, the ones that should be changed, they don't change. But
so I don't know. That's a strange thing to me.
To change rules just for the sake of changing them,
and again, it's usually done for the reasoning of make it more understandable for viewers. But I think this is one case where it does not do that. I think it's a weird change. I think it was already very understandable.
It was very easy to understand. I mean,
and This is another thing, too, that ties into the previous topic, right? We were saying there need to be some special events to bring in interest to the sport, right? That's to have better viewership of the sport, make it more popular, make it more interesting to the common person who's new to watching it, right? So the way you do that is through things like that. It's not by changing things to make it a more understandable viewing experience. Like that's not really gonna, if you want to make it a more understandable viewing experience, then we need to look at things like we talked about before, the press out rule. Like that's an example of something that's really confusing for the viewers. Like, how come that was a no lift? Because his elbow wobbled a little bit. Like that's not good for viewership. No, any common person who is unfamiliar with the sport is going to watch that and say, why? That's obviously good. He lifted it over his head and held it. That's a lift.
Exactly.
So it's just funny that they do these silly little things to try to improve the viewing experience, but they don't spend any time on doing the things that would truly help to promote the sport and make it better to view.
Or bring back,
kind of ironic,
bring back the things that were popular. Fourth attempts. People want to see world records.
Yeah.
The record breakers.
People would love to see fourth attempts.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Why you get rid of things that the fans loved? Fourth attempts was
I don't
that was one of my favorite.
Don't understand.
That was one of my favorite things to watch in a competition. Fourth attempts.
And they were up for it. Like we were saying before, they were attacking world records back then.
They wanted to break the.
Now it's like I said, it's almost the culture has changed so much to where sometimes you see people win on a second attempt and they don't even take their third attempt.
Yeah, that's a shame. That's not good for the fan.
Yeah, and I get it in a certain sense. If it's not an important competition, I kind of understand it because they're trying to preserve their athlete a little bit. But it's definitely not very exciting for the fans.
No, you got to make it exciting for the fans.
To see those conservative efforts.
Yep. Okay, I think we've covered everything.
But, we went over quite a few little topics today.
Yeah,
Went well over an hour this time.
I think Artie might have to make this into part 1 and part 2.
Yeah, whatever he wants.
Okay. Well,
Wrap it up there.
we thank everyone for listening. Hope you enjoyed it. God bless.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. The heel gets the heat. The babyface gets the cheers. But the jobber gets, well, the job done. And speaking of jobbers, Barry Horowitz wasn't there to win titles. He was there to build them. By selling every move, every storyline, and every new star that stepped into the ring. He was the secret sauce. And now, he's the headline in his new book titled Wrestling is My Gimmick, My Life on the Wrong Side of the 3 Count. This memoir is a deep dive into wrestling's most underrated position and the man who made it an art form. Whether you're a fan of wrestling, a fan of sports history, or just love a great story, this book is for you. Again, that's Wrestling is My Gimmick by Barry Horowitz. Grab your copy today before the count strikes 3.